Victoria Mitchell signed the divorce papers with a satisfied smile, completely unaware that her husband Grant had just won a $70 billion contract that very morning, the same morning she chose to divorce him and abandon their sick child to marry her lover, Derek Sullivan. While Grant sat in that cold hospital room watching their 8-year-old daughter Emma fight leukemia alone, Victoria was already packing her designer bags, her phone buzzing with Derek's messages promising her the glamorous life she deserved. Grant had sacrificed everything, worked 3 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, missed countless business meetings, all to pay for Emma's treatments, while Victoria complained about their poverty and found comfort in Derek's arms. The $70 billion contract Grant had been negotiating for 3 years, the one that would transform their lives forever, had been signed just 6 hours before Victoria served him the papers. She spat on him, called him a failure, and Derek laughed as they kicked him out of his own house. But here's what Victoria didn't know. What happened when Grant's company announced the contract the next day? How did Victoria react when she discovered what she just walked away from? And most chilling of all, what did Grant do when Victoria had the audacity to invite him to her wedding with Derek, expecting to humiliate him one final time? Grant Mitchell's hands trembled as he held the hospital release forms, his daughter Emma's frail hand clasped in his. The 8-year-old's bald head rested against his shoulder, her breathing shallow after another grueling round of chemotherapy. He'd been at Mercy General for 72 hours straight, sleeping in that uncomfortable chair, feeding Emma ice chips when she could barely swallow, singing her favorite songs when the pain became unbearable. His phone had died 18 hours ago, and he'd missed the most important call of his entire career. Robert Whitmore, CEO of Titanium Industries, had been trying to reach him about the final signatures on the Pan-Pacific infrastructure contract, a deal Grant had been architecting for 3 years. 3 years of 18-hour days, of flying to Singapore, Dubai, and Sydney, of sacrificing every comfort to build something extraordinary, while his wife Victoria complained that he wasn't present enough in their marriage. The hospital room door swung open, and Victoria walked in wearing a dress that cost more than Emma's latest medical bill. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum floor. Behind her stood Derek Sullivan, his tailored suit and confident smirk radiating the kind of arrogance that came from inherited wealth rather than earned success. Derek owned a struggling tech startup that burned through investor money faster than it generated revenue, but he looked successful, and for Victoria, appearances were everything. "Grant," Victoria said, her voice cold and businesslike, "we need to talk." Emma stirred against his chest, and Grant gently lowered her back onto the hospital bed, tucking the thin blanket around her. "Not here, Victoria. Not in front of Emma." "Emma's asleep," Victoria replied dismissively. "And this can't wait. Derek and I have plans." Grant's jaw tightened as he stepped into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him. 5 years ago, when they'd met at Stanford Business School, Victoria had been different. Or maybe he'd just been too blind to see who she really was. She'd been attracted to his ambition, his drive, his vision of building something meaningful. But ambition without immediate gratification had proven insufficient for her tastes. When Emma was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years ago, Victoria had slowly checked out of their marriage, complaining about the medical bills, the canceled vacations, the modest apartment they'd moved into to afford the treatments insurance wouldn't cover. "I want a divorce," Victoria announced, pulling a manila envelope from her Prada bag. The words hit him like a physical blow. "What? You heard me. I'm done, Grant. I'm done with this poverty, with your obsession with work, with playing nurse to a sick kid while you chase impossible dreams. Derek can give me the life I deserve." Grant's vision blurred with rage and disbelief. "Emma is your daughter, our daughter. She's fighting for her life, and you're talking about the life you deserve?" Derek stepped forward, his hand possessively on Victoria's waist. "Face it, Mitchell. You're a failure. 3 years chasing some fantasy contract that's never going to materialize. Tori deserves better than sleeping in hospital chairs and eating vending machine food." "That fantasy contract is real," Grant said quietly, his fist clenched. "It's the largest infrastructure deal in Asia-Pacific history, and it's going to change everything." Victoria laughed. a brittle sound that echoed in the empty hallway. Sure it is, Grant. Just like all your other big promises. Remember when you said we'd be millionaires by 30? Well, you're 34, and we're broke. I've wasted the best years of my life waiting for you to become someone. The manila envelope hit his chest and papers scattered across the floor. Divorce documents already filled out, just waiting for his signature. Grant bent down slowly, gathering them with shaking hands, his mind reeling. This morning at 6:47 a.m., he'd been on a conference call with Robert Whitmore and the Consortium of International Investors. They'd signed the contract, $70 billion over 10 years to build smart cities across 12 countries. Grant's engineering firm, Mitchell Innovations, would receive 30% of the total contract value, $21 billion, with $7 billion in immediate funding to begin operations. The signing had been scheduled for 9 a.m., but Emma had crashed during the night, her fever spiking to 104 degrees, and he'd thrown his phone in his jacket pocket and forgotten about everything except keeping his daughter alive. His phone was dead. The messages were waiting. The announcement was probably already being prepared, and Victoria had no idea. Sign the papers, Grant, Victoria demanded. I'm not waiting anymore. Derek and I are getting married next month, and I need this finalized. What about Emma? Grant asked, his voice barely a whisper. What about our daughter? Victoria's face hardened. You can have full custody. I'm not cut out for this, Grant. I can't watch her suffer anymore. Derek and I are starting fresh, building a real future, without the baggage. The word baggage felt like acid in Grant's ears. Emma wasn't baggage. She was everything. She was the reason he'd worked himself to exhaustion, the reason he'd mortgaged everything, including his dignity, to make this contract happen. And Victoria was walking away from her like she was discarding last season's wardrobe. Derek pulled out a pen, offering it with a condescending smile. Come on, Mitchell. Make it easy on everyone. You know you can't give her what she needs. Grant took the pen. His hand moved across the signature line, muscle memory taking over while his brain screamed in protest. The marriage was over. Maybe it had been over for a long time, and he'd been too focused on survival to notice. He signed his name, watching the ink dry, feeling something fundamental break inside his chest. Good, Victoria said, snatching the papers. And one more thing. I'm taking my half of the joint account. Derek needs capital for his business expansion, and the rent on our new penthouse is due. Consider it my share of our assets. That account has $43,000, Grant said slowly. It's Emma's treatment fund. It's all we have left. Victoria shrugged. You should have thought about that before prioritizing work over family. Derek's startup is about to explode. He's meeting with venture capitalists next week. This is an investment in our future. That money is for Emma's treatments, for her medication, for... You'll figure it out, Victoria interrupted. You always do. Besides, once your fantasy contract magically appears, you'll be rich, right? She laughed again, and Derek joined her, their mocking voices echoing off the hospital walls. Then Victoria did something Grant would never forget. She stepped closer, her eyes filled with contempt, and spat directly in his face. The warm saliva hit his cheek and dripped down toward his jaw, and Grant stood frozen, too shocked to move. That's what I think of you and your pathetic excuses, she hissed. You're a failure, Grant Mitchell. You'll always be a failure. Derek roared with laughter, doubling over, his hand slapping his knee. Oh my God, that's perfect. Did you see his face? Grant wiped his cheek slowly with the back of his hand, his vision tunneling, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. But he didn't respond. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood there, watching the two people he'd once trusted most in the world walk away, their laughter fading down the corridor. When he finally returned to Emma's room, his daughter was awake, her huge eyes filled with questions she was too weak to ask. Grant sat beside her bed, held her small hand, and wondered how he would tell her that her mother was gone. The divorce papers crinkled in his pocket. Outside the window, dawn was breaking over the city. 3 days after Victoria took Emma's treatment fund, Grant received the eviction notice from the house he'd paid for. Victoria had somehow convinced the landlord that the property was solely hers. producing documents Grant had signed during Emma's worst crisis weeks, papers he barely remembered seeing through the fog of exhaustion and fear. Derek had moved in immediately, his clothes filling the closet Grant had once used, his expensive cologne permeating the rooms where Emma had taken her first steps and lost her first tooth. When Grant arrived to collect his belongings and Emma's medical equipment, Victoria was waiting at the door with Derek beside her, both of them looking like they'd already won some unspoken competition. "You have 2 hours," Victoria announced, checking her diamond-studded watch. A gift from Derek, no doubt. "Derek's interior designer is coming at 4 to renovate. We're erasing every trace of your presence." Grant didn't argue. He'd learned that arguing with Victoria was like reasoning with a hurricane, exhausting and ultimately pointless. He'd borrowed his colleague Marcus's truck and brought boxes from the hospital's donation center. Emma was staying with his sister Rachel for the afternoon, finally stable enough for short visits away from medical supervision, though her treatment schedule remained relentless. Grant moved through the house mechanically, packing Emma's stuffed animals, her art supplies, the photos of her before the cancer stole her hair and 30 pounds from her tiny frame. He avoided the master bedroom, couldn't stomach seeing the space where he and Victoria had once planned their future, now transformed into Derek's domain. "Oh, this is precious," Victoria's voice called from the living room. Grant emerged from Emma's room to find her holding his Stanford diploma, the frame cracked. "Remember when you actually had potential? When people thought you might actually accomplish something?" Derek lounged on the leather couch they'd bought together, his feet up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone. "Bro, you gotta admit, you peaked early. It's sad, really. All that education, all those big dreams, and you end up as a glorified contractor who can't even afford his kids' medical bills." Grant set down the box he was carrying. "The account, Victoria. You took Emma's treatment fund. She has an appointment next Tuesday that costs $8,000. Without that medication, her immune system—" "Not my problem anymore," Victoria interrupted, examining her manicured nails. "You have full custody, remember? That means full financial responsibility. Derek and I used that money for something actually productive. His tech startup just leased new office space in the financial district. 5,000 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows. We're hosting a launch party next month. Very exclusive. You spent our daughter's cancer treatment fund on office space?" Grant's voice cracked, disbelief warring with rage. "Our daughter," Victoria repeated mockingly. "That's cute. She's your daughter now, Grant. Your responsibility, your burden. I've moved on." She walked to where Derek sat and perched on his lap, her arm around his shoulders. "Derek's company is projected to be worth $50 million within 2 years. We're investing in the future, not throwing money into a bottomless pit of medical bills." Derek kissed her neck, his eyes locked on Grant with deliberate provocation. "Plus, we needed capital for the wedding. Tori deserves the wedding of her dreams, not some courthouse ceremony like you cheap losers did." Grant's hands clenched at his sides. He remembered their wedding, a simple ceremony in Rachel's backyard, beautiful in its intimacy because they'd agreed to save money for the business he was building. Victoria had claimed she wanted something authentic and meaningful. Now she was planning an extravagant spectacle with his daughter's medical fund. "The wedding?" Grant repeated flatly. "Next month," Victoria confirmed, practically glowing. "The Rosewood Estate, 300 guests, live orchestra, imported flowers from Ecuador. It's going to be absolutely spectacular." She paused, a cruel smile playing at her lips. "And you know what? You're invited." Grant stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "Oh yes," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I want you there, Grant. I want you to watch me marry a real man, someone who can actually provide for his family, someone successful. I want you to see what you lost, what you threw away with your pathetic work obsession and your failure to achieve anything meaningful. Derek and I discussed it, and we both agree. Having you there, watching us celebrate, will make the day even more perfect." Derek laughed, raising his champagne glass. When had he poured champagne? In a mocking toast. "Come on, Mitchell. Be a good sport. Watch your ex-wife marry up. Way up. Consider it a learning experience. Maybe you'll finally understand what women actually want." Grant felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest. The humiliation, the cruelty, the casual dismissal of Emma's life. It all coalesced into a clarity he hadn't felt in months. These people thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken him. They had no idea that while they were playing house with stolen money, Grant's phone had finally charged, and he'd seen the 247 missed calls, the emergency messages, the frantic emails from Robert Whitmore and the consortium's legal team. The contract was signed. The announcement was scheduled for tomorrow morning. $21 billion was being transferred into Mitchell Innovations' corporate accounts, and Victoria was inviting him to watch her marry the man she'd betrayed him for, expecting him to arrive broken and defeated. "I'll be there," Grant said quietly, picking up his box. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Victoria clapped her hands together, delighted. "Perfect. Oh, this is going to be so good. Derek, did you hear? He's actually coming." "Classic," Derek said, standing and approaching Grant with exaggerated sympathy. "Look, man, I know this is hard for you. Losing your wife, your home, your dignity. But hey, maybe seeing how the winners live will inspire you to finally get your act together. Who knows? Maybe in 10 years you'll have climbed up to middle management somewhere." Grant walked to the door, his boxes stacked in the truck outside. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. Victoria and Derek stood together in the living room of the house he'd worked himself sick to afford, surrounded by the furniture he'd assembled, beneath the ceiling he'd painted. They looked triumphant, untouchable, secure in their victory. They had no idea that across town, Mitchell Innovations' board of directors was preparing a press release that would transform the infrastructure industry. They had no idea that Grant had already met with Emma's oncologist and paid for her next 6 months of treatment in advance. They had no idea that the impossible dream they'd mocked was now the biggest contract in the company's history. Grant smiled, a small, private expression that didn't reach his eyes. "See you at the wedding," he said, and closed the door behind him. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by courier to the modest apartment Grant had rented near Children's Hospital. Emma was having a good day, playing with her new tablet, a gift from Robert Whitmore, who'd become unexpectedly invested in her recovery, while Grant reviewed construction timelines for the Singapore Smart City project. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, embossed with Victoria and Derek's initials intertwined in gold script. Inside, the invitation was even more ostentatious. "Victoria Chen Mitchell and Derek Allen Sullivan request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration." Grant's sister Rachel, who'd been staying with them to help with Emma's care, read over his shoulder and gasped. "She didn't. Please tell me she didn't actually invite you to this circus." "She did," Grant confirmed, studying the invitation. "The Rosewood Estate, the most expensive wedding venue in the state. Saturday evening, black tie required." A handwritten note in Victoria's distinctive script was paperclipped to the invitation. "Grant, looking forward to showing you what real success looks like. Try to dress appropriately. V." Rachel snatched the invitation and crumpled it. "You're not going. Tell me you're not going." "I'm going," Grant said calmly. "Why would you torture yourself like that? Why give her the satisfaction?" Grant smiled, glancing at Emma, who was absorbed in her tablet game. The past 2 weeks had transformed everything. The contract announcement had sent shockwaves through the industry. Mitchell Innovations stock had tripled. Grant's personal wealth had exceeded $1 billion. He'd paid off every medical bill, established a trust fund for Emma's future, purchased a house with a pool where she could recover in comfort. But he'd told no one outside his immediate team and Rachel. He'd kept his life deliberately small, deliberately quiet, letting the world, and especially Victoria, believe nothing had changed. The announcement had been covered in financial papers and trade publications. But Victoria and Derek existed in a bubble of social media and lifestyle magazines. They had no idea. Robert Whitmore had asked Grant to attend a gala celebrating the contract, but Grant had declined. "I have a prior commitment," he'd said. "A wedding." Robert had laughed, understanding immediately when Grant explained the situation. "Then let's make sure you arrive appropriately," Robert had suggested. Now, sitting in his modest apartment with the crumpled invitation and his recovering daughter, Grant felt a sense of calm purpose. He wasn't going to the wedding for revenge. He was going because Victoria had invited him specifically to humiliate him, to parade her victory, to crush whatever remained of his spirit, and he was going to show both of them, exactly what they'd thrown away. Uncle Grant looks happy, Emma observed, looking up from her tablet. Her hair was starting to grow back, tiny dark fuzz covering her scalp. Her color was better, her eyes brighter. The experimental treatment protocol Grant could now afford was working miracles. Uncle Grant is happy, Rachel corrected, ruffling Emma's returning hair, and he's about to make some very stupid people very, very sorry. The Saturday of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, cloudless skies, and gentle temperature. Grant dressed carefully in the custom tuxedo he'd had made for the upcoming charity gala. Mitchell Innovations was sponsoring. The fabric was Italian, the cut impeccable, but he wore it like armor rather than costume. Rachel helped him with his cufflinks, platinum engraved with Emma's initials, while Emma watched from the couch wearing her favorite princess dress. She was staying with Rachel's family for the evening, finally strong enough for sleepovers, finally believing in a future beyond hospital rooms. "You look like James Bond," Emma said, grinning. "Are you going to fight bad guys?" "Something like that, sweetheart," Grant replied, kissing her forehead. The Rosewood estate was 40 minutes outside the city, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a European countryside. Guests were arriving in luxury cars, a parade of wealth and status. Grant had arranged for Robert Whitmore to provide transportation, and when the convoy arrived at the estate gates, the security team's expressions shifted from bored professionalism to shocked attention. First came the Rolls-Royce Phantom, midnight black with tinted windows. Then 2 Range Rovers filled with security personnel, and finally landing on the vast lawn with thunderous precision, a private helicopter bearing the Mitchell Innovations logo. Grant stepped from the Rolls-Royce, his security team forming a subtle perimeter around him. Guests had stopped mid-conversation, staring at the arrival. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's Grant Mitchell, the Grant Mitchell, the one with the $70 billion contract, the one from the financial news." Victoria and Derek had positioned the ceremony in the garden, white chairs arranged in neat rows, an elaborate floral arch at the altar. Music was playing, something classical and pretentious. And there, near the entrance, greeting guests with champagne and smiles, stood Victoria and Derek. Victoria's face when she saw him was something Grant would remember for the rest of his life. The champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stone pathway. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Derek turned to see what had caused her reaction, and his expression went through a similar transformation. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally dawning horror. They recognized the helicopter. They'd seen the news coverage they'd been too self-absorbed to pay attention to. They understood in that crystallizing moment exactly what they'd done. Grant walked toward them, his security team maintaining respectful distance, his custom shoes clicking against the stone. Guests parted like water, their whispers growing louder. Victoria had gone pale beneath her professional makeup, her hands trembling. Derek looked like he might be sick. The man who'd laughed while Victoria spat on Grant, who'd mocked his dreams and stolen his daughter's medical fund, now stood frozen, his confidence evaporating like morning dew. "Hello, Victoria," Grant said pleasantly. "Thank you for the invitation. Beautiful venue. Must have cost a fortune." Victoria's voice came out as a whisper. "Grant, we didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Grant asked, genuine curiosity in his tone. "Didn't know about the contract you laughed at? The fantasy deal that was never going to happen? The one that's now the largest infrastructure project in Asia-Pacific history?" He smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "Oh, that. Yes, it was signed the morning you served me divorce papers. While I was in the hospital with Emma, watching our daughter fight for her life, Robert Whitmore and the consortium finalized everything. $21 billion. Can you imagine?" Derek found his voice, though it shook. "Look, man, we can explain." "Explain," Grant interrupted. "Explain how you stole my daughter's cancer treatment fund to pay for office space? Explain how my ex-wife spat in my face while you laughed? Explain how you invited me here specifically to humiliate me?" He looked around at the elaborate wedding setup, at the imported flowers and live orchestra, and 300 guests who were now completely focused on this confrontation. No explanations necessary, I understand perfectly. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of panic, not remorse. Please, Grant, we made mistakes. We can fix this. You can what? Grant asked softly. Come back? Apologize to Emma for calling her baggage? Return the money you stole? He shook his head. I'm not here for reconciliation, Victoria. I'm here because you invited me. You wanted me to see what I'd lost. So look. He gestured at himself, at the security team, at the helicopter still idling on the lawn. This is what you lost. This is what you threw away for office space and Instagram photos. Derek, desperately trying to salvage something, stepped forward. The office space is an investment. Your company is hemorrhaging money, Grant said flatly. I had my team research it. You're 3 months from bankruptcy. Those venture capitalists you were so excited about? They passed, all of them. You've been burning through inheritance money and whatever you could extract from desperate investors. And now you've burned through Emma's treatment fund too. He paused. That office space you're so proud of? I bought the building this morning. Your lease is terminated, effective immediately. Consider the early termination fee my wedding gift. Derek's face went from pale to scarlet. You can't. I can, Grant corrected. And I have. Mitchell Innovations is expanding our corporate headquarters. That building fits our needs perfectly. He turned back to Victoria. As for you, I want you to know something. Emma asks about you. She doesn't understand why her mother abandoned her during the hardest time of her life. I've been trying to explain it in ways that won't break her heart completely. But there's no good explanation for what you did, is there? Victoria's tears were flowing freely now, her makeup running, her perfect facade crumbling. Guests were recording on their phones. The moment was being captured, documented, shared in real time across social media. The influencer wedding Victoria had been planning, the showcase of her upgraded life, was transforming into her very public destruction. I want to come back, Victoria sobbed. Please, Grant, I made a terrible mistake. I'll do anything. No, Grant said simply. The single word carried absolute finality. You made your choice. You chose money over your daughter's life. You chose humiliation over dignity. You chose this. He gestured at Derek, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the manicured lawn. Live with it. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Victoria, that joint account you emptied? I've filed legal charges for theft of medical funds. My lawyers will be in touch. Stealing from a child's cancer treatment fund carries serious legal consequences. Derek, your investors will be interested to know where their capital actually went. I've already sent them documentation. Grant walked back toward the Rolls-Royce, leaving devastation in his wake. Behind him, Victoria collapsed, her designer dress pooling around her on the ground. Derek stood paralyzed, watching his future dissolve. Guests whispered and recorded, already crafting social media posts about the most dramatic wedding crash in history. The helicopter lifted off, its rotor wash scattering flower petals across the ceremony space, a fitting metaphor for the destruction of Victoria's carefully constructed fantasy. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from the Rosewood estate, Grant checked his phone. Emma had sent a selfie from Rachel's house, her smile bright, her eyes full of life. Love you, Uncle Grant. Having the best time. He smiled, genuine warmth flooding through him. This, Emma's recovery, her laughter, her future, this was what mattered. Victoria and Derek were footnotes now, cautionary tales about greed and cruelty. Their wedding had become their funeral, their moment of triumph transformed into permanent public humiliation. The financial and legal consequences Grant had set in motion would ensure they'd spend years trying to recover from this single afternoon. And through it all, Grant felt no satisfaction, no joy in their destruction, only a quiet relief that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived.